Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I want to talk about thrift stores and I want to know what the hell is going on with thrift stores, because if you've been in a thrift store recently, you probably have noticed that the prices are kind of ridiculous and unreasonable. It's starting to feel like the end of an era, and it's really upsetting. It's one of those things, like thrift stores are one of those things that I never even considered might be one of those things that wouldn't always be there. It's a lot of greed that has kind of resulted in the downfall of thrift stores as a lot of us have known them to be. I noticed that a lot of the younger generation and people who didn't have to thrift for necessity, I've noticed that they don't really understand, and they think that we're being a little bit dramatic when we are upset about people who thrift for sport or thrift for content or resell. And the reason that we do is because of the implications and how it's kind of changed thrift stores and what that's really done. So when I was younger, when I was a kid in the 80s, what my family did was they kind of had to supplement a lot of times by going to the thrift store for things like housewares and clothes for myself and my siblings, because when you're a kid, you grow quickly. Your feet, they grow fast. Your clothes, you're constantly growing out of things because kids just grow fast. You're constantly having to replace this stuff. And kids in my neighborhood, in my class, in my school, the same thing. You know, a lot of the families, you had your middle and upper class families, but for a lot of us, I was lower class, and a lot of the other lower class families, they had to rely on thrift stores so that they have things to wear. So thrift stores to me were always something that were going to be there when you needed it. And as I got older and I became a goth and got involved in the subculture, thrift stores were kind of a source of excitement for me. It was like a playground. And I remember being exhilarated at the concept, like euphoric, knowing that I was going to the thrift store, and I would spend hours just going through all of the racks, all of the boxes, looking high and low, looking for like that one treasure. And you can really grab like a lot of things and piece together your like perfect look. And it was so much fun for me. You know, I would go in, and where I would go, the same place that a lot of goths would go, is we'd go straight to like the underwear section, which I know a lot of people probably find gross, but that's where you would find like a lot of the great stuff. You'd find all of the slips, all of the nightgowns, and what was meant to be like a 1960s kind of chiffon boudoir look. When you pair it up with a goth accessory and makeup, you kind of have Bride of Frankenstein instead. And it worked. And it was great for DIY, and it was also inexpensive, because when you're a teenager and you're on a budget, it's perfect. As time has gone on, unfortunately, what was affordable for families and kind of the thing that families relied on isn't really there in the same capacity anymore, because now I don't know really where it started, but now you have people that are thrifting for sport and thrifting for content, and it's people who don't need to do that. So what I've noticed, and I'm sure a lot of you have probably noticed, that there's a lot of resellers out there when it comes to thrifting, and there's also a lot of people who thrift for content and thrift for sport, people who don't even necessarily need it. I see a lot of content creators that kind of post videos, and you can see them a lot if you just look for it on YouTube, how to make the most money on Poshmark. And there are these women who do it as a hobby, and you look at their homes and they have these beautiful, huge homes. They clearly don't need the money, but they do it as a hobby, and a lot of them will readily admit that they do it as a fun hobby. And there's nothing wrong with having a hobby, but the implications of that is when you're doing this and they're going through these stores and they're filling their carts. I mean, filling their carts to the brim, sometimes 2 carts. And what they're doing is they're taking all the items from the families that go and actually need the stuff, or other people who say they have a new job, they need clothes for work, and they can't actually afford the conservative clothes that they need to wear to work. So they go to thrift stores, but it's not there anymore, because you have these people that are going in and either thrifting for content or thrifting to resell, and they're putting those items up on Poshmark and they're selling it for quadruple of what they paid for it to make a profit. If they were doing it because they needed to bridge that gap, because they were just not making enough to kind of make ends meet, and they needed to feed their family, or they needed just a little bit extra to keep the lights on and not get their electricity turned up at the end of the month or anything like that, I'd understand. But a lot of these people are not doing it for that reason. And I kind of had it out a little bit with a thrift talker. I wasn't being mean or anything like that. I just want to point that out. I wasn't being mean. But I wanted to point out that, you know, she said that she came from humble beginnings and that she knew how to thrift to survive, and that's what she did. But now she does it for fun, does it for sport. And something that I saw that she did kind of upset me. and she took a pair of kids' shoes. She didn't have any kids. She has an office, like she's an entrepreneur, she has her own office, and she saw this pair of little kids' shoes in the kids department. They were like designer shoes, and she goes, oh my God, these look great. I know exactly where I'm going to display these in my office. And she was buying them to display in her office. Now these are kids' shoes. I remember having to go into a thrift store as a kid needing shoes, and they're like, as a family out there that has a kid that probably could use those shoes, but instead she's kind of using them to display in her office. And I mean, she bought them, she has a right to do whatever she wants with them, but at the same time, it just kind of speaks to the temperament of the kind of people that are going into thrift stores and the reasons versus who's missing out. So whereas these shoes are now on display in her office, there's a little kid who could have potentially be wearing those shoes. So I went into a thrift store recently, and one of my favorite ones is called Island Thrift. So I went into Island Thrift, and the thing about Island Thrift is they have many all throughout Long Island. They have a lot of them, and they're huge. They're warehouse size. If you've seen any of my thrift store hauls, you've seen me kind of going through, and you see how big it is. And the thing about Island Thrift is they don't pay for any of the items that they receive. They get items by the truckload. People just donating stuff, and they have everything. They don't throw anything out. Everything goes on those shelves, goes on the racks. So they're not paying for any of the items. The only thing that they pay for is rent, electricity, and they pay their employees. So everything in that store, all of their stock is pure donation. They don't pay for a single thing. And when you go in there and you see an item that still has the tags on it, and say that store price tag when it was sold brand new was $29.99. You look at the tag that they're selling it for, they'll either sell it for the exact same price or more. That just completely defeats the purpose of a thrift store. I've noticed within the last year the prices starting to go up, and I've noticed even more so recently now that they're ridiculous. Like, these are not thrift store prices. Like, it's actually at the point where it's cheaper to buy fast fashion than it is to buy thrift. And you see a lot of these resellers and you see a lot of these thrift talkers, and they kind of boast about sustainability and being ethical, ethically sourced, and all of these things. And what's funny is being a kid in the 80s and the 90s and getting accused of getting your clothes in the thrift store it was an insult. You were kind of looked down upon. It's like, oh, you're poor, you get your clothes in the thrift store. But the very same group of people that would kind of chastise you and criticize you for having to shop in the thrift store are the same ones that criticize you for not shopping in the thrift stores now. When it's conveniently for them, they can afford it, and now we can't. Because what happens is when you have kind of all of these people going in to buy all of the stuff in excess, the management, obviously, they see that their demographic has changed, and they charge more because they can, because now they know that they can get more. They're not catering to poor people anymore. Now these people are coming in and they know that they're going to spend top dollar, so they jack up the prices because they know they're going to pay it. But in the interim, you have people who actually rely on thrift stores to survive. We go in there and suddenly can't afford anything anymore. Who the hell is going to pay $30 for a t-shirt? Not even a brand name t-shirt, something that says like Florida on it. Thrifting, and it's a complete contradiction to its namesake, thrift. To thrift means to be conscientious, to be frugal, to not be wasteful with your money. And throwing $30 down on a t-shirt with spaghetti stains on it, yeah, that's being wasteful. And what's really unfortunate is a lot of people, and rightfully so, are really angered at the concept of people shopping fast fashion. And it's because of ethical reasons. And again, completely understandable. But when you have somebody that's on a budget that has absolutely no choice but to shop in a thrift store, but they've been priced out of thrift stores now, your gripe really needs to be with the people that price them out of the thrift store and not the person that is just trying to survive. And it's not like these people are buying clothing from fast fashion just to stay on trend. They're buying pants that they can wear to work. They're buying clothing for their kids. They're buying clothes just so they don't have to be naked out there in the streets. So the one caveat to that whole thing are the people who utilize thrift stores and they don't really do it with the most noble intentions. You have people who can afford to shop sustainably. They can afford to be ethical, but instead what they do is they want to get more for their money. They want to swap out their stuff mid-season, and they love the huge selection that a lot of these fast fashion brands have, and they'll spend upwards of $500 every few months in order to swap out their clothes mid-season. But what happens to those clothes? They end up in thrift stores, they end up in landfills, and then you have your average person who just wants to buy enough clothes to get them through the next few years, maybe have clothing to wear to work so they can look professional and be able to maintain their job. You have those people being chastised because, again, they've been priced out of thrift stores. So when you have people who will resell or thrift for sport or content, what they end up doing is they strip that place completely bare of anything that's usable for the average family that relies on it. So they go in for anything that they need, and the resellers have just completely picked it clean. Whatever's left is extortionate in price, and they can't afford it anymore. And that's just the weirdest concept, not being able to afford the thrift store, because that is what it's there for. By its very namesake, to thrift is to be conscientious and to be frugal and to not be wasteful with your money. And there's nothing thrifty or frugal about it. It pisses me off to see people up on their high horse chastising people who have been shopping thrift stores their entire life, and suddenly they're incapable of affording it anymore, and they're utilizing other means, whatever they can possibly afford, in order to maintain the lifestyle that they always had. And suddenly you have these people who priced them out of the thrift stores in the first place, the ones who bought everything up, the ones that are reselling it, who are chastising them and criticizing them and shaming them for not shopping in thrift stores, because I see it so much. You see it in the comments of a lot of these videos. Why don't you just shop in thrift stores? Nobody can afford thrift stores anymore. And there are websites like, say, Poshmark and Vinted and things like that. And again, the whole irony of the situation is really mind-blowing, because it is the very same kind of groups of people that would make fun of you for shopping in the thrift store as a kid because you couldn't afford anything else. They're the same ones that are guilting and shaming you for not shopping in thrift stores now. Fortunately, there are online options for thrifting, and if you can afford it, it is a little bit pricier than the regular thrift store, but if you haggle, you can shop on places like Vinted or Poshmark, and you can kind of somewhat bridge that gap a little bit. It's not going to be quite fast fashion cheap, but you can still get nice items that are better quality if you know how to look for things. And the whole concept, if you're unfamiliar with it, if you're unfamiliar with places like Poshmark, Vinted, Depop, you favorite items. Go through, shop, look for the things that you like, and you want to heart things, favorite them. Because what happens is you're going to have the seller of that item, they're going to send you offers, 10% off, free shipping, whatever. And you can haggle with them. If you like it, make them an offer. And the worst they can do is they can decline your offer. But it's a really great way to be able to kind of get that thrift store experience, if that makes any sense. It's not quite the same, and it is still pricier than, you know, the former glory of what thrift stores were. But if you're a person who really relied on thrift stores to clothe yourself and you're kind of forced into fast fashion now, I would recommend kind of looking at Depop, Vinted, and Poshmark. And it's not going to be the same. You're not going to get the same thrift store experience. It's still going to be more expensive because you still have to pay shipping. And you could always haggle with people. Like I said, you could always put in offers. They can always send you offers for things. And you're not going to get the same amount that you would normally get in like your thrift store former glory days. But it's better if you really want to distance yourself from the whole idea of fast fashion in general. What it also does is it kind of ensures that you're going to get a better quality item, because if you shop by brand name, say if you're shopping by The Gap or Free People or Zara, for example, you know that you're going to find something that's not going to be like potluck surprise, you know, when you order from a place like Shein, and you hope that what you get is of good quality because the picture looks like good quality and it looks like, say, something that's made from like a good quality viscose, and then you get it and it's made of tissue paper and you could see right through it. That doesn't always happen with fast fashion. You really have to read the fine print. You have to look at the description. You have to look at the fabric content. You have to look at the reviews and really see what people are saying about it. But when you go on places like Poshmark, Depop, Vinted, even eBay, what you're doing is you're kind of removing that aspect of it. Like, you're not really worried about what's going to show up because you kind of know what it is you're looking at anyway, and you have more one-on-one contact with the seller, and there are standards. So you know what you're getting, and it also removes that whole moral guilt issue that you tend to feel with buying fast fashion. It upsets me. I really don't want people to lose out on like the wonder and majesty that is the thrift store, because Those were like the funnest times. I don't know if any of you had ever done this, but did you ever get together and you have like your thrift store Saturday? You call your friends and you're like, we're going to go to the thrift store. And you get so excited, you get ramped up, and you go and you have like a full day of going to all of the thrift stores, like the big ones, the church ones. You get up early in the morning and you spend your whole day. And it's like the best fun. And I've gotten so many amazing things from the thrift store, and I've learned how to DIY by way of shopping at thrift stores as well, because the items were so affordable and well priced that I was able to kind of use a lot of the pieces to, practice techniques on. Some of the pieces you also pick up, sometimes they need mending because they're vintage and they might be coming apart. So it's another great way to learn how to sew, because you're learning how to mend by hand a lot of these pieces. So not only did I get a lot of my kind of individualized looks from the thrift store, but it's where I also learned how to sew, how to mend things. And it's a great jumping off point for things like that. And I don't want people to lose that. And it's just kind of, it's kind of a lot of people's culture in general. It has a lot to do with people's history, but it also has so many like insane roots in the goth subculture, because that's where a lot of our outfits came from. You go to the goth clubs and you looked around the room, a lot of what you saw came from the thrift store. You would be able to put together these amazing looks that were just so layered and unique and individual, and you were able to really express your own individual style by way of all the things that you found. I remember I found a men's velvet blazer that I paired with a vintage slip, but under that was kind of a ripped sheer top, but it wasn't a ripped sheer top, it was actually tights. I got a pair of old tights. I washed them first. It was a pair of like vintage black old lady tights. I cut the feet off. You cut a hole in the crotch like we do with all of our tights. Once they kind of bite the dust, that was like a fun thing back in the day too. Once your tights bit the dust and they were like kind of on their last leg, no pun intended, you turned it into a shirt, which you layered underneath different things. And that's what I did. You would layer with fishnet, regular sheer, different textures and types of tights would go on your legs. You turn them into shirts and you would wear it under vintage slips or vintage nighties, and over that you would put like a velvet blazer that you would sew patches to, or you would put safety pins through, or brooches, or embellish in any way that you could possibly think of. And that was how we kind of maintained our individual style, and it all kind of boiled down to you as a person. Like, you picked up this one piece, but this one piece was just your template. So when you went to the thrift store and you picked up all these different things, you got like a vintage dress, bunch of vintage tights, old slips, men's blazers, and you put it all together and you put your own personality into it, and you had so many of these individualized looks that standalone looked like regular pieces, but once you put them together, and it's kind of hilarious when you think about it, because so many of these things that came out of a grandmother's closet that you would think smelled of mothballs, and a lot of them did, and were also moth bitten, but you just kind of patched it up and put it back together with safety pins, which even made it more individual. It became your personal style. I still to this day have managed to hold on to pieces that I picked up at the thrift store from the 90s. And they're in the form of like old slips. And there's this one, I'm going to show you this dress. I showed it in a video once before. I grabbed that dress and I held on to it for dear life, and I was not letting anybody near it because I was convinced that somebody was going to try to take it away from me. And I was fully prepared to rip someone limb from limb if they tried. And fortunately, I got it home, and it was less than $20. So that was the whole thing. I don't remember exactly what I paid for it, but it was the 90s, and you never spent more than $20 on any. I don't even remember anything being more than 10 in the thrift store. And another thing I used to get quite a lot of were rosary beads. There was a church thrift store I used to go to in Lake Ronkonkoma, which was right by my high school. And one of my favorite things that I used to do on my lunch break is I would go to Five Corners Deli, and it was like, it really is, it was Five Corners, and it was Five Corners Deli, and on one quarter across the street was a church, and there was a church thrift store in there and a cemetery right next to it. So I would get a bacon, egg, and cheese and a hot chocolate, go into the church thrift store, and I would get a ton of vintage slips and a bunch of rosary beads, and it was like fill a bag for $1. And then I would go to the small adjacent cemetery to the church, and I would just sit and have my bacon, egg, and cheese and hot chocolate with my bag of rosary beads and vintage slips and old tights that I would turn into tops. And I think that whole thing really just made us so much more creative and appreciative of the things that we had and the things that we found, because of the work that it went into to find it, and also the work that went in to turning it into what it was. And we really did appreciate each individual thing. I think nowadays we kind of lack that a lot, because I think the more that we rely on things like kind of cookie cutter, goth in a box type things, it takes the imagination out of it. And I hate anything that's obvious. I never go for things that are obvious. Sometimes if something is so obvious that it's obnoxious and funny, I will get things. I don't like anything that is already done for you. I want things that you got to put in the work to do. I want the thing that, we have to put in our own personal style to make it what it is, because it's the way that you express yourself rather than expressing whatever store that it came from. If you're one of those people who relied on thrift stores and you can't afford it anymore, I definitely recommend giving Poshmark a try. And the sellers there could definitely use it, because I notice that sales are down there quite a lot, and I see a lot of my updates in my feed. There are a lot of sellers that are getting rid of things for super cheap because they're just not shifting. So they could definitely use the business. They're getting rid of things for incredibly affordable prices, and you could always haggle with them. Just give it a try. There's definitely no commitment there. Just go on, see what you like, make some offers, and you never know, you might snag some pieces that will last you for many, many years. I would say easily 90% of my wardrobe is secondhand, and the majority of it came from either Poshmark or thrift stores. And Poshmark has definitely served me well over the years. I've gotten a lot of great items there, and things that were initially very expensive, and I managed to get them for, pennies. And not literally, I wish, but I've been able to get it for a very reasonable price. And I don't like to spend a lot of money on a wardrobe, and particularly working in like a spa environment. Previous job, I worked in a spa in a 5-star hotel in a town called Garden City on Long Island. And Garden City is a very affluent area. So a lot of the clientele were very affluent people and also celebrities. So working in a spa, even though I did have a jacket that I needed to wear, it was a lab coat, a black lab coat, you still needed to look like you can hold your own amongst people that can afford 5-star amenities. So when I needed to look expensive, that's where Poshmark came in, and I was able to kind of get a lot of things that made me look presentable, which was very important. And a lot of jobs are like that. A lot of jobs are sticklers for your appearance. And what makes me think of this, I for some reason will never forget this. I had to book an endoscopy, and I was at my gastroenterologist, and I was with one of the receptionists in the area trying to book it, and she was very young. She was a student, very sweet. And I remember she leant over to grab something, and she was wearing a collared shirt, and the collar puffed out, and I saw the label on her shirt, and it said Shein. It made me remember when I was about her age, and I worked in so many different places. I worked in a video store, I worked in a pharmacy, and everywhere I worked, I needed to look conservative or presentable, and I needed a button-down shirt for all the things, except one of them. That's when I worked in a photo lab, and I developed people's photos. Back then, before digital cameras, you wouldn't believe the things that people would take pictures of. That should be a separate video. Some crazy stuff. So I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to hear your experiences when it comes to thrift stores, and what your experiences have been back in the day versus now. And do you think thrift stores are ever going to make a comeback by way of kind of serving their original function, or is this the end of thrifting as we know it? But I'd love to hear your thoughts. I hope you like this video, and until next time, guys. Bye.